the European nations declared that any non-Christian lands that may be encountered could be founded and claimed in the name of the country that discovered them, is what they considered that. So systemically, that's just based in religion and racist before it even gets here for us. 1492, please just do any kind of basic research into the diaries of any of Columbus's journals. In the name of the church, he took back slaves, he committed atrocities. From the time we're just little kids, we hear about being fed to dogs and how Christopher Columbus was here in the name of Christianity and learned about atrocities you just don't learn about anywhere else in the world being committed against our Indigenous people here. So in 1493, that doctrine of discovery was quickly updated when they realized that there was land mass. So through the, so that sent voyagers over here from France, Great Britain, and Spain. Now in 1497, that was the first time that there was ever European contact in North America, which would have been in Quebec, the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was much closer to us. So all of these initial contacts, and these are just a few broad contacts, first contacts that you can be familiar with, but for us, there are thousands and thousands of first contacts. But these most significant historical first contacts, all church funded, were all here with the intention of satisfying needs of the church in the name of this doctrine of discovery. That alone is just a lifetime worth of research, understanding that. So that was John Cabot, who was actually the first explorer to come over here on behalf of a government and declare any kind of land under the 1493 doctrine of discovery. So these are essentially how far race and religion goes back with us. It goes completely back. Our entire history with any races is based in colonialism, which is essentially through the doctrine of discovery based in Christianity and founded in Christian principles for Christian advancement. So the timeline jumps completely through the 1500s. If you just geographically think of how big of a mission it would be and how dangerous of a mission it would be to be traveling back and forth to northern land and to be traveling warm waters to the Caribbean and expanding from there, that's what most of the exploring through the 1500s did. So while all of this was done in first contacts for Indigenous people everywhere, I'm only speaking for Great Lakes Indigenous people, that's what was happening in the 1500s. So early 1600s, colonial contact starts settling along North American borders. Now, our people in our teachings here in the Great Lakes, those were our homelands. We came from those places over there along in the East, debatably, depending on the teachings. And so those were our good families that at one point in time over there that are just completely extinct. Now, I hate that word, but have been completely decimated from the coast. That started in 1600s. That was all still under the guise, you can go to the next slide, that was still part of the doctrine of discovery. Champlain did a lot of the mapping, back one more, please, did a lot of the mapping for like all of Eastern Canada, and those waterways that came in the St. Lawrence Seaway and how those seaways came in, and they were really looking for a way all the way across, which they never found. Okay, there should be, is there a slide before this one? So from the early 1600s, say 1650, this one. 1650 was when Western Michigan started getting contact. Now, started having their first contacts. Our first contacts were with Jesuits. They were with long robes. You hear them referred to as black robes nowadays, but they really didn't get termed black robes until the religions started separating off. These were Roman Catholic priests. They were the long robes. They were the they had the ability to come in with any of the explorers. And so in 1650, they had come through Michigan, not just down Lake Michigan, but they had come through Michigan. It was one of the first waterways and routes that they discovered here, and come to Grand Rapids. And that was where the first contact in Grand Rapids and even further south, Grand Rapids was about that time, 1650. Some of them came from north, most of them came from across the state. So from 1615 through most of the 1700s were spent moving over and colonizing. Now what happens here on the East Coast 100 years later will happen to us here in the Great Lakes region. 100 years later will happen west of the Mississippi. So these are the timelines. These are how we think of the timelines. So through the 1700s, further colonization, and these are when, mind you, 1776 was when the Constitution was written, and like 30 lines down were identified as not human, not capable of not being worthy of receiving the rights of the Constitution, being listed as a completely separate class of people. Also, I didn't list that here, but we all know that the Constitution was found in religion and is very religious based. So we go to 1822. Isaac McCoy. So this is real specific. Isaac McCoy was one of those 1822. He was one of these explorers that came from the north all the way down Lake Michigan, came in from the St. Lawrence Seaway. He came from, I want to say on the East Coast, came down all the way down to the headwaters of the Kankakee marshlands down towards Indiana, the southern tip of Lake Michigan, and that's where my people are from. So he established a settlement there, which is the Potawatomi settlement that was called Carey Mission. There's so limited knowledge about it. We know there was an Indian school there. We know there was Indian schools with different names. So he was allowed to do that as a Baptist minister. So now that's not just Roman Catholic relations. That's a Baptist minister and Baptist funding. So after he established down here where my people are, my Pokagons, which were the St. Joseph Indians at that point in time, he went to, in 1826, he went to Grand Rapids. So this individual created two settlements amongst what were Potawatomi trade areas down here in the south, and then Potawatomi Odawa trade areas that were in the north and south there along the Awashnong, the Grand River. So again, here we go, we're 300 years, 400 years into colonization, and all of our interactions are religious and Christianity based. So in 1838, that was 1826 when Grand Rapids, he started getting solid settlements and everyone started incorporating. So 1836 was the Indian Removal Act. The Indian Removal Act, there was a border. If you look at old maps of Michigan, there was a border that was called the Indian Line. And all along the Indian Line, it's marked what lands are fertile, what lands aren't fertile, what lands are held by the government, what lands are available. And the Indian Removal Act was supported basically by everyone and everywhere, and it removed any tribes and Indian people south of that Indian line in Michigan. North of that Indian line is where there are reservations, and reservation land was set aside. So a lot of our people from the Removal Act disbanded. A lot of our people went to different states. They went to places where there were more protections. They did things that made them better able to survive. All of this based in our relationship with Christianity. One of our greatest survival method was becoming Christian. So there's that. And in 1838, as a member of a tribe who was supposed to be removed, my tribe specifically agreed to embrace Catholic Christianity. We attained land. Our families were allowed to stay, but we weren't allowed to be Indian. We had to proclaim that we weren't Indian anymore. All of the rights of Indians went out west of the Mississippi to Kansas, or with families that went to other places. And it was it was 100 years before we were even allowed to apply to be considered a tribe for having stayed and retained our culture and our identity and our bloodlines. 1879 was when Richard Pratt, he was a friend of Lewis Cass, William Jackson, Andrew Jackson. Kill the Indian, save the man was Richard Pratt's motto. That's what he was famous for. So he created the first residential schools, Indian residential schools here in the United States. And he was in charge of Indian people that when they were under arrest or whatever that procedure was then, was allowed to send people to a military camp. And that military camp is what he fashioned the first Carlisle Indian School after. You can go to the next slide now. And there was 4 of them that were the initial Indian boarding schools. Richard Pratt was the founder of those. And those are just an atrocity that you're going to continue to hear about because it's politically being addressed now, peeling back those layers for us. We can't even get a level ground until we get all these layers peeled back. Okay, so that was 1879. 10 years later, Holy Childhood in Harbor Springs was built. Didn't take long to put an Indian school and take all the Indian kids out of their homes up here where our families were, because remember, we're not down here in southern Michigan anymore. There aren't no tribes allowed to be down here, except Nottawaseppi has a small patch of land. They've got no rights. They just got a small patch of land. So all the Indians are north of the Indian line. And here comes 10 years later, after the very first boarding school, Holy Childhood. Now, Holy Childhood operated for 40 years, longer than boarding schools were supposed to be closed. You won't find that on the internet. I have it in this timeline. So that's one of the things that you can Google it, and I don't think you're going to find it, that timeline that Holy Childhood operated and had Indian people still my age going to school there before they actually, I guess, just decided themselves they were going to close the doors and stop operating. So in 1973, so all of this time, let me wrap this up here before I hand you off to Chris. All of this time, wrap your head around the fact that we don't have any religious freedom whatsoever. Everything and all of our survival is based on Christianity and our relationship with Christianity. In the meantime, we are spending generations and generations not legally allowed to have our own religions, practice our own religions, talk about our own religions. Most of the time, we're not allowed to speak our languages. In these schools, we're not, because that's how you save the man, is to kill the Indian out of the man. So it wasn't until 1973 that my parents had in Hastings got married, and that was my first official act of rebellion and fighting as a human being for our religious freedoms. We didn't get the freedom to actually be performing those ceremonies and gathering in those ways until 1978, until I was 5 years old, 5 years later. So please look into the Religious Freedoms Act. Harbor Springs didn't close their doors until 1986. I couldn't find that anywhere on the internet, but that's a fact. Chris, our last speaker, Cami, is going to talk about today, some of the things that we're encountering today. But next, Katako Name Nokmas, our short-winded grandma, is going to speak next. That's Chris Showman. We're always really honored to hear her stories and from her. We appreciate her perspective in our community and our families. So we hope that you extend that same respect to her and her voice here. And trigger warning, because I think she may talk a little bit about some realities of boarding schools and some of the things that are our relationship with Christianity, and just the rest of the world doesn't know these things. So I know I went over, but Cami is a little bit sick and Chris likes to be short-winded. So I'll hand it over if that's procedure.
Yes, thank you, Madeline. And we've been maneuvering in the background. So Cami and Chris were very gracious and yielding some of their time to you. So thank you so much. So helpful. I really love the overview with the timeline. And I am very pleased to introduce Christine Shaman, if you would unmute yourself.
Good evening. My name is Christine Shulman. I am originally from Petoskey, Michigan. I belong to the Little Travis Bay Band of Adawas in Harbor Springs, Michigan. I'm a retired employee from Grand Rapids Public Schools, and I am the founder of Anishinaabe Circle. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about Indian boarding schools. And there's just so much material out there that take a lot of time. But this is what I put down to share with you this evening. The first Indian boarding school began in 1860 by the Bureau of Indian Affairs on a reservation in Washington. Shortly after, the first off-reservation boarding school was established by Richard Henry Pratt. The Carlisle Indian School was located at Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Pratt's motto was "Kill the Indian and save the man." They went on to be as many as 365 Indian boarding schools in 29 states, with 3 being in Michigan: Mount Pleasant Industrial Boarding School in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Holy Child Indian School in Harbor Springs, Michigan, and Holy Name of Jesus Indian Mission in Baraga. They were largely ran by several different religious denominations, being Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Catholics, Hicksite Friends, Orthodox Friends, Baptists, Reformed Dutch, Congregationalists, Christians, Unitarians, American Board of Commission of Foreign Missions and Indian Territories of Oklahoma, and Lutheran. So children were taken from their homes by U.S. soldiers that were they were handcuffed and taken away from their families. If a parent tried to prevent that from happening, they could be hauled off to prison for a year. And at some point, the help from the government that these Native families received were cut off also. In 1900, there were 20,000 Native children in boarding schools, and by 1925, that number had tripled to 60,000 Native kids that were taken away from their mother and father. Indian industrials, and they were known as Indian industrial schools. The children performed heavy unpaid labor in the homes of white families, called outing programs, and other times they were engaged in outperforming manual labor at schools. They were used for domestic and physical labor. Native children were not allowed to speak in their native language or practice their native religion. Their hair was cut and any traditional clothing was taken away from them. Hunger, starvation, beatings, ill cloth in the cold of winter, sexual predators roaming the dormitories halls in the middle of the night like wild animals, searching for prey and snatching youngsters from their beds. Lack of medical supplies caused death. The tragedies Native American children faced during this era have impacted the lives of not only the children, but also their families and communities. These impacts have caused Indigenous communities to experience deep-rooted ramifications in regards to mental health and the overall relationship between Native communities and the American education system. They are often displaced in the form of poverty, difficulties in the American education system, poor physical health, and poor mental health. Many Native students who survived the boarding school era went on to suffer from mental health, other related issues such as anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, a lack of cultural identity, and the development of negative stereotypes as being lazy, alcoholic, dirty, etc. This traumatic experience have been passed down from generation to generation and continue to impact Indigenous communities today. So that's a little bit about boarding schools, and it really breaks my heart to think that these places were places of God, and how could, you know, how could these poor innocent children be treated the way that they were is beyond me. And can just imagine sending your child to school every day and not coming home, or, you know, I don't know. I can't say a whole lot because, you know, like, you know, it's very emotional for me. I myself was blessed. I was not in a residential school, and how that happened, I do not know. I come from a family of 11 children, but we didn't have to experience boarding school living. I have two grandmothers that went to the Mount Pleasant boarding school. One of them had run away, and even with all that happening to them, and then my mother was in a boarding school, her child, and so neither were none of her children. But even with all the horror, terror of things, horror of the children happening in boarding schools, I was raised as a Catholic. Both of my grandmas were very, very religious Catholics, strict Catholics, and we were raised through the church. We received our sacraments. We went to Catholic school, and as I grew older, I grew away from the church, and I did try different churches. I went to Baptist, I went to Methodist, and there's just something about when I would go, like, there was something that would piss me off, and I would quit going, because I just can't believe that some of the people that participate in these religions and these religious groups and these churches, like, to me, this is a house of God, and how can you look down on other people, and how can you you know, think you're better than other people? And so I tried many times to belong to a church, and then I would end up leaving. And my thought and my belief is that you don't need to be in a church to be able to be able to believe and to participate in prayer. There is a higher power out there, and to me, I believe in that higher power, and I do pray every day, and I live a good life. And I mean, you know how to you know what you have to do to live a good life, and how to care for people, care for yourself, care for your family, and yet, you know, give. To me, you don't give to your community and give to people that are in need, and you don't need to belong to a religion to do that. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Christine. Such difficult, hard content, and we're so grateful for your willingness to share this information and its impact on you. So thank you. And Cami, we're delighted to hear from you. If you would please speak next.
Right, bonjour, Kemi Castaneda, Indigenous, Jimmy Gwetch, Madeline, and Chris for coming with me tonight and sharing your knowledge and sharing your story. When I was asked to do this, I was very nervous, and I said I couldn't possibly speak for all Native Americans when it comes to race and religion. So what I can speak about would be my experiences and what I see today as a Anishinaabe woman in Grand Rapids. And, you know, as most know, I mean, this is a very Christian, West Michigan is Christian. I grew up, and as you can see, we're talking about generations here. We're talking about generational traumas. And, you know, the one thing that I heard growing up was get over it. It was so long ago, even as a kid. The other children in our class, would, I would talk about land. This was our land. Well, they would tell me, well, it's not anymore. It's not anymore. That happened so long ago. Get over it. I still hear that today. But as you've seen in the timeline, it wasn't that long ago. Can you guys not hear me well?
Cami, we can hear you, but it's quite staticky.
I'm not sure why. Is it any better if I get closer?
I think it's just a static interference.
Oh. So what I can say as a millennial, a modern native, is a lot of us are, like Chris said, we're moving away from the Christian Catholic religions, even though we were raised that way. I was raised that way. I was baptized. I received my first communion. But as we become more educated and as we learn our ways, we're learning those through our tribes. Our tribes are the ones who are holding those teachings. We have ceremonies, we have different lodges, and those teachings are coming from our elders. Our elders held on to that, and they were able to make sure that our religion wasn't lost all of these years. And they suffered, they died for these teachings, and for us to be able to speak our languages, for us to know these teachings is such a great honor, and it's important. And that's what we try to tell our next 7 generations, is to be thankful for those 7 generations before you, because without them we wouldn't be here, and without them we wouldn't know things that we know, and we wouldn't be able to do things that we are doing. There are other, like I said, I can't speak for all of us. There are other Native Americans who are still very much into Christianity and want nothing to do with the traditional teachings, and that is fine. As Anishinaabe people, we respect all religions, all beliefs, and we always have. And so that is definitely something that we still carry. So I don't know how I am on time, so.
Cami, thank you. Thank you so much. All 3 of you, very, very powerful voices. What we want to move into is a question and answer time now. And so if you have anybody who has questions for any of our panelists, please put those in the chat. If you want to direct them to one of the speakers in particular, please indicate whether you're directing your question to Cami or Christine or Madeline. Otherwise, we'll just kind of randomly ask people so that we hear voices. If you have still not changed your name on your screen, it would be helpful if you would change your name to your own name instead of mine, if it came up as Barbara Van Horsen. And enter your chats, your questions in chat. Mary Jane Evink will be sharing the questions as you type them there. And I know we had a couple of questions that came in ahead of time. So Mary Jane, I will let you lead this portion.
Thank you for submitting questions. This first one isn't directed towards anyone in particular, but Cami, let's start with you. Many people, Indigenous and others, have been deeply wounded and hurt by religions, ideologies, and people representing them. How do people collectively heal from that trauma?
I would have to say we have to acknowledge this trauma and take responsibility for it. In addition to that, it's not just us that have this generational trauma, it's also the descendants from those that, the people that created this trauma, because we have to acknowledge that those belief systems might still be systemically, or are still systemically trickling down today, even though you may not even realize it, because that's just the way things have always been, and that's what we always hear. Well, it's always been this way. Well, we need to make changes.
Christine or Madeline, do you have anything to add?
I don't.
Then I will ask a new question. How are the churches responding to the recent uncovering of mass graves here in Canada? And Christine, since you spoke about boarding schools, I wonder if you'd like to start with answering that question.
Well, at first I don't think they were, but now I think they are, and I think they are forming ways of of apology. And I think they are trying to educate their congregation or whatever it is about what's going on, and being able to express that it was wrong what had happened. I know there's a movement for that, and exactly what they're doing, I don't know, because I don't go to church. So, but I know there is something out there that is happening, that they are acknowledging it, where at the beginning they weren't.
Madeline, a question for you. Can you speak about racism within tribes or towards tribes?
Well, towards tribes, it's pretty overwhelming, and it's on every level. Like, it is on our economic development levels, it's on personal levels, it is on just walking into the room levels. So, I mean, there's no, as a unit, as a tribal unit, there's no level of living and surviving and thriving that we do that isn't we don't encounter racism. As individuals, it honestly depends on how colonial your family is. If your family isn't married into Christianity and a lot of colonialism, then you will, as an individual and family, suffer a lot more, just because you're not as knowledgeable as the communities that you're engaging in and where you are. Most of us do have some colonial blood in us, and so we're able to get along with limited amounts of racism. But like, it's never not in your mind. You're never not thinking about it when you are out in the world, in your jobs. It's just part of our existence.
And Madeline, I think the person asking this question is wondering if there is racism within the tribes as well.
As in between different tribes, no. Tribes don't. Tribes have their own dichotomies. So an Native American dichotomy is different than a tribal dichotomy. But within that, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of tribal relations. There's a lot of actual reasons that tribes have different relationships with each other and what their personal histories are. Racism doesn't apply to those tribal relationships. I don't know how I could. There's tribes that don't like other tribes. I mean, but that's not based in like a class system, or it's based in past relationships and their history with each other.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, it's for anyone. What's the biggest things you hope people of Christian and Christian adjacent faiths can do to move towards healing and reconciliation?
I could say one of the things is it's been national news that mass graves of children have been found. And here in the United States, Deb Haaland has approved, the Secretary of Interior has approved for churches in America to be investigated. And I hope that the churches allow these investigations and are forthcoming with the information that they have. They have always kept our records, so I am sure that there are records that could help these investigations. So that's a start.
What's Christian adjacent? Can someone give me an example of what that is? What one of those religions would be?
Barbara?
I'm not familiar with that term, but I wonder if it's referring maybe to the Judaism, Islam.
Oh, okay.
Oh, somebody mentioned Unitarian Universalist.
Mm.
Okay. Oh,
Okay,
I don't-
Madeline, I'm going to
well-
bring you the, oh, go ahead.
well, I did kind of want to comment on that. I don't know, because we don't know. That's good. Because we don't really know the workings of how religion, how you operate in your life as a whole. I don't really know if I could say how you could act as individuals. Is that what that question kind of means? Like if you're a Christian person or if you're part of one of these religions, what can you do as an individual or as a family? Is that, oh, then, I mean, I'm sure that my panelists agree that education, like people being aware and being educated, is just where everybody has to start. Even our own families have to start there. And until we can, all come from a common ground and agree on a common history, we can't even, we just gotta keep doing what we gotta do unless, everyone starts to agree on a common history of everybody's situation. Yeah, education. In your school, so someone touched on it in the comments too, about it's crazy that this stuff isn't taught in schools. Michigan's really good. Michigan has a education, Native Indigenous Education Committee that is adding Indigenous created curriculum to all of the K through 12 curriculums. All we do is try on our behalf because it contributes to the overall thriving of our future generations. So we constantly are educating ourselves from the beginning of time on, what this relationship is with Christian people. So it's very easy for us to do. You guys got to break away from your church, because I know the church won't acknowledge, like the Catholic Church, the Pope just won't, he won't refute the doctrine of discovery, even though many other religions are trying to, as a whole, broader religions. And they just won't offer an official apology from the Pope. And like, how do you, like, it's very foreign to us to relate to someone else's story from someplace else anyway, let alone that's doesn't make any sense and isn't really trying to come to any reconciliation without an actual apology from the top, from the source of it. But all the other religions underneath that are apologizing and trying to make headway. And I don't know, it's a hard religious place to be, it seems like.
So to paraphrase, education is key, learn the hard history, and religious groups can cooperate while they're learning the hard history and learning about new facts. Here's the next question. How does racial battle fatigue affect your tribal group?
When you say tribal group, I assume that means tribes.
Yes.
There's always up and coming generations. We're always passing this down for the next youngest kids and family members to pick up, and it's not an option.
So you rely on the new energy of each generation to pick it up.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing too. It's a beautiful cycle to always see new energy coming and Not really seeing energy burnout ever. People just age.
So here's the last question for now before we go into breakout rooms. Is there any concern that when Indigenous people push for their history, that it will also be placed under the fear of critical race theory?
I don't really know what critical race theory is, Cam. I know your throat hurts, but
No. Yeah, can you explain it?
So critical race theory is a fear that there's teachings of people not being proud of who they are, or maybe being unpatriotic, or any maybe teachings about diversity, race, or inclusion. Although I'll say that's the fear. That's not the clinical definition of critical race theory.
Right. No, I honestly, I mean, when we raise our children with the culture, I've seen them be proud of who they are. I know that the somebody says that's not what CRT is. Okay. I think that you know, learning these, like you said, the hard history, I mean, it's tough. My children are African American and Native American, Indigenous. And so there are so many holidays where they come home and be like, we don't celebrate that. What are you talking about? You know, there was Lincoln, they were learning about Lincoln. I said, you know what Lincoln did? And I told them about Dakota 38. He hung 38, 39 natives all staring at each other. They had to watch each other fall the day after Christmas. I said, he was not a good man. And my oldest daughter, she's 14 now, she goes, dang, Mom, she goes, what can I celebrate, you know, in this country? And so America has a horrible, horrible history. So I would have to say, no, my children are not patriotic at all, because they know the history of our people here, unfortunately. But we do have veterans that are well respected in our communities who are warriors. And it's unfortunate that, you know, they fought to protect our people, they fought to protect America, but America never fought for us.
it might be hard to hear when she says that her family and her kids aren't patriotic at all. But we weren't citizens until 1924, and that was based on us getting the right to vote. And most removed people really weren't voting and didn't have the right, the proper requirements to vote until the 60s. So it wasn't even until then that we were full members of the United States of America, considered fully equals. And while we want to be equal, most importantly, we are different. We're not Americans. We didn't choose, and our people didn't choose to come to America and live this American life and be American people. This is a circumstance from an occupation that we are still trying to survive the results of. So we saying we're unpatriotic, we really have a totally different definition of what supporting our people in our country means. We're like the definition of patriotic, but we are not patriotic to America as a whole, because we're not essentially, we're Native Americans, we're Indians, we're Anishinaabe, we're Indigenous people. We want to be recognized for our differences or we'll cease to exist. So I don't know what critical race theory is, but if that means that we are promoting our differences, we are promoting our differences. We are celebrating our differences, because we couldn't until 30 years ago. And even longer, there's still laws all over the place that we can't speak, that we can't gather, that we can't be in public places. Like, they don't just take those laws off the books. They're technically all still on the books all over this country. So to say that we're patriotic would be hard for us to be. We love football though.
Thank you, Madeline. I just read Holly's comments, and I get what you're saying, Holly. So learning all of that history would keep us, like you're nothing but, a second class citizen. Maybe putting that in our kids' heads, like all of these horrible things that happen. But one thing is learn all of this and just leave them with trauma, their strength in our teachings and in our culture. So no, I don't think that CRT I'm not scared of that, at least.
I'm going to move us into small groups, but I did want to just mention, for a point of clarification, I think critical race theory has been grabbed onto as a way to try to stop conversations around the historical abuses of our country. And it's been labeled as something that is a divider instead of something that's about a lens through which we look at the way decisions have been made here. And so there's a particular agenda that's very anti-critical race theory. And I think the question had to do with, if we start talking about the real history of the treatment of Indigenous people, is that pushback also there, that we don't want to talk about that because that somehow makes us critical, because does it put us in the same, does it put Indigenous history in the same category as Black history with a certain group of people who don't think we should go there, which is not the stance of the Anti-Racism Task Force, which is that we need to know the history, and we can't move forward without knowing that. So thank you so much. What we are going to do is go into our small groups now. And so everybody's been kind of pre-assigned to a breakout room. There will be a facilitator in each room. Our speakers have been randomly assigned to a room. The facilitators have the questions. We don't have a ton of time to get through them. So I'm going to send you into the groups. You might get pulled out and put in a different group if they end up in vastly different sizes, because we try to kind of have an even number. But we'll go into the first group. The first question is, what did you learn or what surprised you tonight? And we'll take 6 minutes for that question. And I will send you now. Okay, I think everybody is back. So welcome back to the large group. I hope you had a really good conversation. We're going to do a very quick reporting out because our time has just flown tonight. I will ask each of the facilitators to unmute yourself and then just share a very quick action suggestion from question number 3. Just take a 10-second soundbite to give us an idea from your group, and maybe try not to repeat what somebody else has said. If you have something new, you can add. And we will start with group 1 and Carrie. So if you want to unmute yourself and share
Yes,
one
thank you.
action item. Hi, Carrie.
Thank you. We had a wonderful time. Christine was in our group, so that was wonderful. Basically, it came down to, after some nice discussion, working together for a common goal, all of us to work together for a common goal, and to be committed to hearing this truth and healing together and accepting the truth. That's a big one.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie, in group 1. How about Mary Jane in group 2?
My group talked about listening to understand, and that there should be representation in community conversations, and that one person isn't representing an entire group of people, but go into the communities and ask questions and listen.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Mary Jane in group 2. How about Greg in group 3?
Yep, great conversation in group 3. And I would say, kind of echoing the end of the opening discussion, education is key was a theme, and learning our history. There's no substitute to diving in deep and learning what has not yet been taught.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg, in group 3. How about Holly in group 4?
Pick 1 or 2 things, do some research, be prepared to be outraged, and then be empowered to take some action.
Thank you. Thank you, group 4. How about Caleb, group 5?
Yeah, I think, the thing we kept coming back to was education, just learning, not only through reading, but also through groups, talking and having conversations. Education is really the thing we're lacking.
Excellent. Thank you, group 5. How about Mary in group 6?
Well, we talked a little bit about our bubbles and that we need to take the time to listen to others and go outside of our bubbles to learn more about other people. And we need to be able to do that somewhere where it's safe, where people feel safe to do that.
Excellent. Thank you, group 6 and Mary. How about group 7, Emily?
Thanks, Barbara. We talked about a lot of the same things that some of the other groups have mentioned, and I'll add that one of the things we discussed was taking inspiration from what our panelists said and take responsibility for passing, the need to change down to the next generation, no matter your background, certainly, like our panelists said, but even if you're not an Indigenous person yourself, we all have a part to play.
Yeah, yep. Excellent. Thank you, group 7 and Emily. Have some closing polling questions for you. So our post poll picks up with the question we started with. Is racism present in our community is the first one. And how comfortable are you talking about race and racism now? The same, more comfortable, or less comfortable than when we began? Again, you need to select both answers and then hit the submit button for it to be recorded. And we'll leave this up for about 10 more seconds to give people a chance. And I'm going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then take a minute to share the results. Is racism present? Somewhat and always are the 2 answers there. And how comfortable? 70% said they're more comfortable than talking about race and racism than when we started. So that's good to see. The next question is an evaluation question. How helpful was this town hall? Was it not at all helpful? Did it help you become more aware? Did it motivate you to action? Or did it convince you to become or continue as a leader or an advocate in this area? And again, we'll leave it up for about another 10 seconds. And encourage you to reply. These answers are really helpful for us as we shape these town halls. And I will close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So 20% said it made them more aware, 45% motivated to action, and 60% convinced to become or continue as a leader. I don't know that I shared those results, so let me share those a moment. And then our next question is about another town hall. Would you be interested in participating in additional town hall meetings? And if so, what topics would you like to see addressed? We list here organizations that are addressing racism, historical instances in the Tri-Cities, racism and religion, which we've been talking about, local government actions, local businesses and the economics of race, implicit bias, white privilege, racism in healthcare, racism in mental health care. And please, again, you can select as many of these as you choose, multiple choices. Select and then hit the submit button. And I'll close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And everybody who answered said that they'd be interested in another town hall. This is where those topics rank. I'll pause here just a moment so we can get a picture of that. And it looks like our most popular topic is local government actions and reactions. And then here's a question about what actions are you willing to take now? Choose all that apply. Are you willing to read, listen, watch, learn more? Engage in more conversations about race and racism, engage in more conversations with people who are not the same race as you, get additional training from a long talk, support DEI initiatives at your school or workplace, attend implicit bias training, get involved in local government, donate to groups that work in this area, join the community book club, or invite other people to the town hall meetings. Please check all that apply.
Can you put that up, Barbara, the question?
Is it not showing?
I don't see it, but maybe others do.
Okay. I can see people are voting. And I'll end it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then here are those results. So a lot of people interested in engaging in more conversation. I just leave those up so we can get those recorded. And the very last question has to do with something that's come out of the series, which is the idea of whether you'd be interested in a conference on religion and racism. We've been working with the Kauffman Institute on this, so let us know if that's something you're interested in and if you'd be interested in helping plan it. I can tell you that I'm really excited about the conversations that we've been having. I do see that we are not getting as much participation on the questions as usual, so I do wonder if there's some algorithm that's keeping people from seeing the questions.
I've seen others, but I can't see this most recent one.
Huh. That is a mystery. I will end this and then share those results. So 79% are interested in that kind of conference. And we have some folks that are willing to help plan it. So we'll probably be reaching out to you. So those are our polling questions. In terms of next steps, we have recorded the conversation tonight, and we will make that and the slides that were shared tonight available. We'll also be sending the questions that did not get answered to our panelists and ask them if they would please answer those in writing and return them so that we can include those in the packet we send out. And then tomorrow, the Anti-Racism Task Force will be meeting, going over the suggestions that were made tonight, reviewing feedback, and looking for action steps that we might take. Next steps that you can take, you can go to the same page where you registered for this conference and click on the button to tell us what you've read, watched, and reflected on. What are your thoughts? And you can do that anytime. We're always looking for people to share their experiences. You can report an action, and you can also learn about supporting the county DEI initiatives. And I want to invite you to our town hall next month. It'll be on Indigenous people, Native and Indigenous people and the land. The fourth Monday of February is the 28th. This is the flyer. It'll go out tomorrow. And our speakers, Eric Hemingway, Levi Rickert, and Kevin Locke. Hope that you will join us again next month for this important conversation. And now, huge thanks and gratitude to Madeline Big Bear, Kristen Shaman, Cami Castaneda for being our speakers. Especially, I know Cami and Chris, you've been feeling under the weather, and yet you persevered. And we are so grateful. I know if we were in the room right now, there would be rapturous applause and standing ovations and just heartfelt gratitude for the vulnerability, the painful information that you've shared with us. We know that there's an emotional cost to that, and deeply, deeply respect that this is not just a speaking engagement for you. So thank you. Thank you for sharing yourself and your history and your experience with us tonight. I also
Thank
want
you
to
for
thank
inviting us.
Miigwech, this was encouraging.
Oh, good, good. And maybe feel free to join us next month and help us figure out next steps, because we do want to identify the next things we can do. I want to thank the members of the Anti-Racism Task Force. If you are in these businesses, please help them, thank them for their support. I want to thank Joanne for timing, and Mary Jane for asking questions, and Caleb and Carrie and Emily, Greg, Holly, Mary Jane, and Mary for facilitating tonight. You guys couldn't do it without every one of the members of the team. Until next time, the divine in me recognizes and bows to the divine in you. Namaste.